discussed the importance of building a multi-agent system and implementing that within a business. Now, we believe the next step within continuing this conversation is understanding, if AI agents are so great, how do I create one? How do I get one? And we're going to do just that and take you through the process of how you actually build an AI agent. So with that being said, I am going to hand over to Cara, and she is going to give us a little bit of background and context on AI agents.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. As Madison mentioned, today we're going to be looking at a demo of our AI agent builder, Ecogentic. So an AI agent is an intelligent system that perceives, learns, and takes action in real time to achieve specific goals. So unlike traditional automation, AI agents adapt dynamically, and this means that it enables smarter decision-making, personalized customer journeys, and more optimized business operations. So businesses can use AI agents to achieve all of the things I just mentioned. For example, automating things like customer support, predicting demand within a business, detecting fraud, or fine-tuning recommendations to customers or clients on the fly. If you use AI agents together with our ecosystem AI's interaction science module, which enables AI agents to learn from every interaction in real time, this module together with the AI agent will allow the agent to adapt dynamically and make more context-aware decisions in the way that it works. So with that was just a little bit of background on what AI agents are and what they do and how they can be used. I think with that, Ramsey, you can start us off with the demo.
Thanks, Cara. Thanks, Madison, for that. And welcome to everybody on this meetup. So first, I'll give you a brief overview of our Ecogentic platform, which is just our ecosystem agentic platform, why we kind of built it. So with kind of traditional agentic platforms, you are limited by the ability to build the interactions into other systems, like being able to set up connectivity to your internal systems or external systems to perform actions or do specific things. But because we built this natively, all our specific technology and tools are natively available in the framework, which allows for a lot more clever and kind of customizable interactions for the customer to personalize their journey in a more exciting way for the customer. Let me share my screen quickly. So to just kind of demonstrate quickly the capability of this, I would like to take you through this. With most agentic frameworks, you have the ability to link together action nodes of some kind. As you can see on the screen, there are a bunch of nodes, these big blue blobs, and they're connected by directed arrows. So it's a directional graph, essentially leading a customer from one point to another. When a new customer comes in, they'll come here at the front. This is also the section where you can kind of set up all the properties required. I won't bore you by taking you through all that. I'm going to show its functionality more. So in this particular case, we maybe run you through it quickly and explain as we go along.
So Ramsey, can I quickly ask?
Yes, please.
So this here, what we're looking at now is someone's installed the platform and now they want to build the AI agent, and this is where they start. This is step one.
Yeah, you'll want to think first about what agent you're trying to build and not just start playing around from scratch. But once you kind of have a plan of what you want to do, like which type of functionalities you want to fit together, you can start building it here. You might need a recommender over here. You might need a generative AI section, certain parts. You can then build them as required for the journey for that customer interaction. The customer comes here, like this is just a generic ID. But what's important to know is this is a customer that we haven't seen before. So this is just a generic customer coming in. The first check we do over here, we just do a check to see, does this customer actually, there's a conditional mode, like just checking, is this guy logged in? If he's not logged in, logged in just means that we don't know who this customer is. You just give him like a generic hello message, where if we did know who this person was, we would have given them a more specific message. In this case, we make it specific by adding in their first name. Say hello to them, a very blanket generic message, and we set them immediately into kind of a conversational AI point to this chat node. So this chat node allows the customer to ask open-ended language-based questions. This specific one is, since this is just a demo, you can make this as complex as you want, but it's just set up as a vector lookup for very sparse set of data. So it won't hallucinate about the feedback that it gives. It basically gives them a corpus of data and say, this is what you know. And as you talk to the thing, it will just respond with true information about your companies. In this case, we can just ask, tell me about company X. Since I'm running this generative AI locally, it is quite slow, but if it is set up in a proper environment, it's much quicker. So it just takes a second or two to come back with this result. Apologies for that. In this case, this thing comes back with some kind of telecom company that's selling phones and airtime. We can continue talking to this thing as much as we want, but besides, its information is quite limited, or we can just ask him, what do we have here? Tell me about contract bundles. I imagine this might be similar to the above things, since this thing doesn't have a lot of information available, but hopefully it will give us more specific information just about the bundles and not generic overview answer there. Again, this takes a second here. In this case, the guardrails actually broke here, which is unfortunate. But essentially, this is also brings us into an interesting point of when you have a generative AI, you need to force it to do certain things at certain times. If you want it to be able to leave that situation, otherwise you're stuck in an infinite loop talking to this thing. So in this case, I set up some not well-tested guardrails. In this case, the language interpreter took me asking about contract bundles as me wanting to ask about some special regarding contract bundles. Portion of the test period when I asked about this, it actually worked fine. So in this case, imagine the kind of intent detection there picked up that we were talking about specials, and it's routing us to this next node. So a lot of times when a customer is coming in, you might not immediately know who they are, unless it is kind of a controlled app channel where you have the login credentials and you can skip over this. It's a nice test as well. In this case, we are looking at specials, and it said that specials are only available to existing customers, so we want you to log in. The only customer that exists on the system is customer ABC, so you start an we're customer ABC. It's going to log us in, so check now that we gave our credentials, are we actually logged in or not? It says, hey, we are logged in, so let's make a recommendation. This is a recommendation node that we set up with any recommenders. It can be complex or as uncomplex as you want. This one is quite simple.
I quickly want to ask you a question about that. With this you're showing now, is this a preset template that a business can use to set up their AI agent? Do you have to make this preset template? Can it be grouped according to themes? How will the agent know which generative nodes to follow?
Currently, we do not have templates for the generative nodes. Are you talking about the generative nodes specifically, or just the Ecogentic framework? Currently, we don't have templates. The capability is still developing very quickly. We are adding new things as we find new functionality we want to include into the system very quickly. But that is definitely in the works to set up a bunch of templates that can be vertical based, so that you can have kind of a starting point to either understand how different nodes fit together, and then start from scratch, or just to use that as a starting point and building out from there. And along with that, we also have quite robust documentation that is getting more robust as we speak.
It actually seems quite interesting when we talk about the templated versus not. I feel like very often when it comes to these AI agents, you almost don't want that template. You want to make sure that they fit exactly into what you are requiring of them.
I see it more as a template being instructional in the sense that it gives an idea of what you can do. So you want those templates to show all the different use cases that you potentially could do, and then ideally you'll be able to fit together different pieces to answer or solve the particular problem that you are facing. if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And it also makes sense what Jessica said about what you both said, that a template would be more of like a use case. Oh, see, this is what you could do with this, but tailor it to your specific needs, which is very nice.
Yeah, great. So what is happening up here is like after you kind of successfully logged in, essentially could have put a message there saying, hey, you logged in, congratulations. In this case, I just bypassed it immediately and told them about the specials that we have. Just a dynamic recommender, which just means that it learns on the fly. So there's no training data in the beginning. When you first set it up, it will just randomly pick a value, but then as customers start running through it, and you can set the granularity, you can set it at an individual level so that each person will have a completely customized experience with recommender, or you can set it at a grouping level by different vectors, whether that is age or interaction personality or any way that you can group as customers, what you decide to group as customers.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Moritz has raised his hand. Can he ask a question?
Yes, please. Hi, Moritz.
Well, thanks for an insightful demo, as always. Quick question. You said it's almost like a cold start in terms of the recommendation engine here. So it starts with nothing and just makes recommendations on the fly. But would it be possible to give it access to my historical data so that it won't recommend it maybe in a conversation where now it knows me, I've logged in and it goes, hey, Moritz, so you're looking for specials. You always use this or that operating system. Would you like to look at that? Something like that, where you consult expert advisor at your telco and that sort of a conversation. Would it be able to follow something like that?
Yeah, so that's definitely possible. That is not a function of whether you're using a static or a dynamic recommender. That's just whether you track the journey history of the customer. With these systems, we track your entire history through the system. So if you do set your recommender up to take that into account, in this case it doesn't, this is a very generic example, but if you set your recommender up to take into account past purchases or past OSs that you know about, then that will, inform the recommender whether the fact that you used Apple before, if it's a good or a bad thing. If you used Apple before and it was a good thing, it will recommend you more apples. If you used Apple before and hated it, it will not recommend you Apple again.
Okay, perfect. So you set up a separate node that handles the historical data on that customer, and then
in this case we picked and recommended this particular model.
All right.
So we'll create a different model, and that will take into account your historical stuff, and then you just select it over here.
Thanks, Ramsey.
No problem, Moritz.
So, yeah, my question here just at this point is like, where would you set this up? You say you've chosen that recommender. Where would you set the recommender up?
Yeah, so this is now going into the depths over here. Here we have our different models of static models and dynamic models. Static models take a bit more effort to set up because you need to have training data. I have any example training data at hand now. So
just a question with the static versus dynamic. We've said that dynamic can definitely use historic data, right? But it doesn't need it. Static models, I'm assuming, then relies on historic data. Like you can't create a static model from no data.
So maybe just explain quickly the big difference between those. Dynamic model essentially retrains every time a call is made to it. So every time a recommendation is made, it takes that into account and retrains the model on the fly. Where with a static model, you have a bunch of history that you say, for the last year, I have all of this data. Let's train a model. It takes a day or two to train, and then you deploy it. You build up more information every time you interact with it. So that allows you to do a cold start, because you essentially just start completely randomized. And as you get more information in, you then start narrowing down what is a good answer. And what's also nice about that is that it's a bit more resilient to changes and trends over time, because if you only train your model once a week and you have a weird outlier event that happens a single day, your dynamic model will be able to pick that up and adjust accordingly. The trained model will only pick it up once it's retrained, and then if it's only a day-long anomaly, it probably won't take that into account.
I see John has a question, Ramsey.
Okay,
Hi, John.
so hi, Ramsey. How are you? Thank you for this presentation. The dynamic model, and I understand because it works well, but you have the static, which is your history. Do they work well together, or does the static, you put first static and you stop the static and then you just use the dynamic to use the historical, and then it works that way, or can they work together? I don't know.
They function quite differently now, but you can duplicate a static model in a dynamic environment by giving it history. So you start with no data and push all the historic data through it in one go, training it on static data. But then you still have the ability to have this kind of dynamic adjustment as you go along.
Right. So I guess there's two kinds of businesses. The ones who just start off today, which don't have any history, which is probably a lot more work to develop. And then there's companies that are like 17 years old that have all this history, which is probably much easier to set up than a startup kind of thing, right? Because of the
it's a completely different kind of data science problem. When you have existing data, you have to figure out, what do I want to do with this data? How do I want to fragment it? How do I want to enrich it? How do I want to pull out information out of here? Whereas the dynamic, you're more relying on an experimentational approach. So you're saying, I think these groups are good and these are the potential outputs that I have. Let's just throw it at the customer and see which one sticks. So it relies more on experimentation. So I just want to see Francois just wrote a message here. Yeah, okay, that's technically true. You can build a static model with no data. It's just going to be completely trash.
It's scary if you're working with something with no history and you're experimentation. Your client comes in and says, "What's going on?" They're confused, and you have to really fix it. It can be a little bit damaging. As long as you understand your business very well and you direct it that way, I think that's a better plan moving forward.
It depends very much on the use case. Certain use cases, the dynamic model will not be plausible, either because the data size is too big, or you want to be very specific. So you want that kind of large historical data and keep it a bit more static. And you don't want to be influenced by micro changes in the environment. It depends, I suppose, is the better answer.
Now, is it possible to have those questions created for the building of this workflow? Having questions saying, well, these are your questions, can you answer me so I can help you build this faster? Is there something in there that can help build the platforms or the workflow better?
Are you basically asking for a setup wizard?
Like a customer service, you want to set up a customer service agent, right? What do you want them to do? Who are your clients? That kind of stuff. It helps you build this faster.
Yeah, that's definitely a good idea. In my mind, it just sounds like a wizard where you ask a few questions, generate a template based on the answers to that questions. Yeah, that's not something we have at the moment, but we are in the polishing phase and making everything as user-friendly as possible. That's definitely one of the things we can do to make that experience a bit more.
Thank you. Thank you, Ramsey. Thank you.
That's cool. Sorry, I'm just checking the chat here. It seems like Jason Francois having a chat, so he wants to experience that. Yes, I'm not going to bore you too much. I'm just going to show you how quickly you can set up a new kind of dynamic model. In this case, I'm just going to give it a name, new model, and give it some training data. It's not training data as such. It's essentially an offer matrix telling it, like, what can you present? What are the values available here? So I just thought, okay, let's just use this, make the same one I just made previously. So I just thought to use those two. And I can select a different kind of engagement algorithms. So I have a few set up here. I'm just going to use this one. And there's some parameters you can set. I'm not going to spend too much time worrying about that, but these are just going to affect like how quickly the model converges. You can set up some of your groupings and things. The only thing you really have to set up is the offer key. This needs to be option 2. Yeah. I go over here, offer key. In this case, I just have the offer and see what my offers are. Just those ones, and you can generate this thing on the fly. This is now, because I'm using the same one, it's overwriting the existing ones, so the history is already there. Well, it's not overwriting, it's because the history is already there. In this case, you can see some of the history of me clicking through it. That was as quick as it is to set up a new dynamic model. That is a very simplistic dynamic model. You can make it a lot more complicated. Setting up a static one, you need historical data. I'm not going to be showing it now. I actually clicked away, so I have to go back to the agent management. And we lost our history, but it still knows we're here. That's good.
So Ramsey, can I ask what you just did now, where you created that recommender in that space of the workbench? When you come back here to the journey builder, does that recommender appear here?
Yeah. So then when you come and go to this recommender, you should be able to see it here. I have 2 recommenders set up here, demo JMS and the ecosystem demo phones, one over here. But what's important is this is more of a structural thing, but these things are limited to the project they're in. So the project is just the overarching kind of container for these things. So when you set up the initial agent, the first thing you do is select a project. So in this case, user JMS. as the project. And in that project, we have two models available, the demo JMS and the Ecogentic demo phones one. Cool. Well, that is another polished thing that we can do. We should come back. The history doesn't get forgotten. I should have just duplicated the pages that are taken out. But this thing still remembers our history, which is nice. So in this case, it would have asked us if we want to buy this thing. So you can just say, yes, we want to buy it. Yeah, this is another important functionality for the dynamic recommenders is it does need to know when a success is generated. So the success can mean whatever you want it to mean, but you need to say, yeah, I gave you an offer, and by default, I assume that the offer was a failure. They should tell me it's a success. At this point, I told it, this recommender says, look at that thing. Whatever you got from there, when you get to this point, tell it was a success. So it told me that because this thing gave me the Xiaomi phone over here, and then I accepted it, it was saying Xiaomi phone is good for this customer. In the future, recommended more to them.
Ramsey, would this include or a scenario in which you have, instead of just one recommendation, you had 3 recommendations and the customer chooses one? It would obviously count that one as a success and then the other 2 as the failures, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Technically not, like I say, you don't count the failures. By default, you presume it's a failure. When you get multiple offers out, you would give one as a success, and you say this one is a success, and you will only count that one. Historically, it will be recommended a bit more. In this case, we didn't really touch that much on the generative stuff, but I'm going to show you a bit about that as well. A big part of the generative world, especially when you have this journey flow, is you want to be able to limit the information and not allow the generative model to just spew nonsense and hallucinate. We use this fact injection framework to allow us to limit and inform. Limit sounds bad. Like it allows the generative to be informed and have realistic and or real data, right data.
So if I can ask, does this feature, if we're looking at the agent you're just talking with now, and it's in a telco situation, you're asking, can you suggest some contracts or bundles? It's contextually specific to telcos in the situation that if I say, can you recommend a restaurant, it's not going to do that.
Yeah. So
Okay.
your journey will be completely set up the way it is. You can, let's create a new one. So we're going to have a few kind of different types here. The vector lookup is the one I used in this example, where it essentially allows you to pump information into, or rather create a data corpus for the generative AI. So you say, here's a set of data that I have that you can talk to. If you want to have something very generic in your already established company, an easy thing to do is just put your website in there. You can just do a vector model and then go HTTP is my website. And it will pull that page, scan all the data, and set up a vector store based on the information there that the model can talk to. Or you can just use documents that you have. Sometimes we just chuck documents in here that we don't want to read and just query it, and then you can very easily find good answers, information quickly without having to scan the document. And obviously, when you start want to aggregate data and tell me what is the average amount of names or dollar earned from this year-end statement, it won't be as good because then you have to be certain that all the data it finds is good. So like some of that kind of fields, unless you just ask a very specific question. Did a test the other day where I looked up a website's information and asked who's the department head of the company. It gave me an answer which wasn't on the website. And I was very confused. So I deep dived into the source code, and I'm assuming it wasn't the previous department head or something, but the data was still in there. It was just commented out. I found hidden data on the website by using this approach, which was quite funny.
John is laughing and he has another question.
Hey, John, how can I help?
Okay, so you got 20 products, you're in the telecom business, you're selling all these cool mobile phones, right? Does the AI agent help you if somebody asks for something that you don't have, and then another person asks for maybe the same product or a different product? Can it keep this somewhere that says you don't have these, but very interesting, and then at the end of the month says, you know what, you got 15 people asking for this model that you don't have. Maybe you should look into bringing that in, because there's a demand out there. Usually people are not making notes when somebody asks these questions. Oh no, I don't have it. The owners of the companies don't get this information. That's really valuable information. So does the AI agent help you say, hey, these people asked this? Is there something
You can potentially build all the data, all the communications are logged in its entirety. If you know that you want to potentially look at, like, do customers ask for something and they don't have particular models that we don't supply or we're out of stock of, then you can just do a scan over your history and see, like, how many times people ask for the XYZ model. You see, oh, they asked 200 times out of the 1,000 people who were here. So we are 20% of the customers actually wanted that and we don't have it. So we should probably get on it.
Perfect.
Yeah, good question.
Thank you. Thank you.
Then some of the other stuff you also do is text to SQL, where you can essentially query information. This is nice if you want to allow the customer to query their own balances and things. So you might ask, like, how many loyalty points have I spent in the past 2 months? If you have data that you want to make publicly available to a customer, you can just chuck in a database, give this access to it, and as long as your fields are sensibly named in that publicly available database, the linguistic query works really good because it has a view of what the field names are and it understands how to build queries. So you can very plain text ask, like, what's the average spend given that I don't drive a bicycle over the past 2 days, and it will give you the answers.
A question from my side on fact injection. So say you want the guardrails of what your agent can answer or do. You want that to change over time. Something's changed in your business. Can you just do that by taking the old fact injections away and do it? How does that process work? Change?
Yeah, you can either create a new one, like a version 2, or you can just take the existing one, change its underlying sources data. So whether that is pointing to flat files or pointing to some database, whenever that updates, the fact injection model will update. So if you want to be a bit more careful, you'll probably want to do a versioning approach where you can roll back if something doesn't work quite the way you want it to. Especially if we saw now I had the issue with the intent detection where it picked it up strangely. That would have been a rollback. I saw that error coming through and I had a stable version for that. What's also quite nice, this is the last thing I told myself I wasn't going to do this, and I have to go back to the agent management, come back here. One thing that's nice is now that we're going to set this thing up, we want to change it and potentially deploy this quickly. And in this case, I just want to reset this thing back to, where do I have this? I said this image, sorry, screen. Just want to go delete all my history here quickly to showcase something. Reset this, because I'm starting this journey from the start. Let's reset it again. This is our initial node that we hit. We don't like that message. We want to say instead, welcome to company Y. How can I assist you this morning? Just type that in, save it, push it. When I talk to it, the updated answer is there. Iteration is lightning fast. Like, you can change this on the fly anytime you want to. Try new experiments. Obviously, I think your limitation will probably be not wanting to put out a structure that's potentially going to not work the way you want it to. In theory, you can roll out a new deployment in seconds, which is quite nice.
I was just wanting to touch on the experimentation and the speed of deployment. If you were to take a spend personality approach and try to communicate with certain segments or categories of your customers in language tailored for them, can you have an instance where it's ultimately the same journey, but the language within each of those nodes is slightly different to appeal to those personalities, or even just the way it's offered? Can you have that for one particular use case?
Yeah, the way to do that will just be to have either a recommender or a conditional node that splits it down to a split base. You can basically just copy this whole section, put it down here, have a splitter at some point. That's it. So that would be the way. It seems like you almost wanted to have in the node itself, have a button here where for this time.
I was talking about that split because you'd obviously start off at a particular point that's quite generic, but we understand that you can't really have a one size fits all, right? And as you get further on the journey, you start to learn a little bit more about the person. Maybe they respond better to certain language or personality, and you can then adapt and update the language and the way that
There's actually stuff we have done for businesses before where we do that kind of spend type and interaction type splitting. We say like, well, this customer behaves in this way, so send them different messaging.
I kind of commented saying drawing from what Jason said. It's when we look at this agent builder, we see that our other modules, spend personality, can then work with interaction science, which then works with the AI agent. They all come together. Is that what's happening?
Sorry, Madison, you have to repeat that. I wasn't following.
So do other modules, spend personality and interaction science, all coming together to work with the AI, the journey builder?
Other models like the intent, the spend personality and things like that are ways to inform decisioning here. You will potentially set up a spend personality and like this person's spend personality is X, and then you can use a splitter at some point, or a recommender that's based on, that takes into account the spend personality to segment the customer into certain parts. So it just depends on how you want to use it. You can use it, you don't have to. You can make a very stupid thing that is just one line from start to the end that just gives 5 messages in a row and then does nothing with it. It's not a very good agent, but yeah, you can make it as intelligent or as simple as you want to. And what's also important to note is this is completely channel agnostic. We have deployments in WhatsApp-based environments, SMS-based environments, and we think we're working on social media. And this current one we're looking at is just an API-driven endpoint. So you can use any kind of website, chat box to link to this, or any kind of generic widget to link to this, which is essentially what this thing at the right is. It's just a generic widget that connects to the backend and selects that. But we actually do have more specific channels, digital communication, that don't want to use just API-driven communication. So that is available as well, which is quite nice. And obviously, things like WhatsApp is a bit more complicated because you can add in things like buttons and such. We do actually support that at the moment, because that was one of the first use cases we did for this was with WhatsApp. So that works pretty well. And I think that's pretty much what I want to show.
I have one more question. With these AI agents, there obviously comes a lot of security concerns, particularly in certain industries where, you know, and we've mentioned this before in the previous meetup, there was the discussion around, is my AI agent going to buy a Porsche with my money instead of doing what I actually wanted to do? So is there a way to have a human in place in this journey, either in it or at the end of it, to ultimately sign off on the decisions that have been made throughout this process?
Yeah, definitely. You have this node type called a breakout node there. And that essentially allows you to, at that point when you hit that node, it will forward the experience to a different channel. So 2 use cases that we actually did in production before is it forwards it to a human in the workbench where they will be able to directly chat with the customer and interact with them. And at some point just say, I'm done, and it just completely jumps back into the point in the journey. It just sits on top and jumps up there, and when it's done, it jumps back down. One of the other use cases is hit a dialer's API, where you then set up a call with the customer and say, our sales agent will contact you in the next 5 minutes, and then they will call and just finalize the details, and they get all the history sent along as well, so then they can understand what the customer wants and what they've done to that point, so they can speak to that customer informed with the information they have already inputted into the system.
Okay, excellent.
Thanks everybody for listening. That is the end of my demo. But any questions from you guys?
Yeah, can we open up the floor to questions? John.
It's me again. So we've been a Google G Suite for Business for 17 years, and I was wondering, does your system work well with Google products? Because we have the whole workspace, right? We got the calendar and all this. Does your system work well with Gmail? Like, how does it integrate, or is there like a Zapier that you have to do to zap certain things? Or
So you basically just asking about integration with some third-party software. So currently, we integrate as required. So we haven't had a requirement for G Suite tools at the moment, but it's things completely kind of modularly designed. So to add a new integration is like a few days work. It's not very hard. And we also have we have the kind of a custom kind of channels as well, where if the client or the customer wants to build their own integrations, quite straightforward for them to do it. Show them these are the steps that you have to follow, and these are the kind of calls you have to make the back end work, and then anything in between you can change as makes sense.
okay, thank you.
Any questions from anyone else? If you want to type them in the chat, you're welcome to do that as well. But if you don't have any questions immediately, maybe I'll just pose a question to everyone, people who are in tech, or your answer can either lean to the tech side or the business side of this. But what do you think is the biggest factor in the businesses or the spaces that you work in that will determine whether or not this space actually implements AI agents? We can have a little chat about that if you would like.
Yeah, I'll just maybe open the floor just to give my view, and then if anybody has a differing opinion, please speak up. But I found that this is kind of where you spent a lot of time on building these guardrails and things, but a lot of people are really worried about the regulatory aspect onto particular companies and how generative AI will fit into that because of the ability to hallucinate and give wrong information. That terrifies a lot of companies from the regulatory aspect, because they don't know 100%, even if you put in quite stringent guardrails, that this thing is not going to lie at some point. So we are working strongly on making it more safe from that kind of viewpoint, so that you do get information that is reliable and trustable and won't be hallucinated and wrong.
John?
Okay, I see it as a training mod. We're in high tech, so knowledge workers that are skilled are really hard to find. So I think it's really important. I think there's a whole training to onboard somebody that might take a year and a half to get to know what they have to do, or really good and be self-sufficient. It's a year and a half. By having these tools and bring that up to 2 months instead of a year and a half, that's huge savings. So I think trainings, I think there's going to be involved of maybe helping the customer service side of things. So it gives you recommendations, and then the person says, I like that answer. Actually, it's really better than how I would have said it, and then post it. And over time, it's like training an employee, right? Training a manager, or training a whatever. It does take time. So that person who's been doing that job for 7-8 years it gives you recommendations, then to the post. I think that can reduce the chances of hallucination or making errors or going off track. And over time, you say, you know what, you're doing a good job, autopilot. I think that's a way I would do it. I don't know, like, just saying my 2 cents, right? Yeah.
No, I agree. That's quite cool.
No, definitely insightful.
Yeah.
Ramsey, Mo, quick question. So
Yes,
would this agent be modal? So I'll give you a use case example. In an asset leasing company, if you would like to build an agent to prepare the customer, every 3 years, the customers renew their entire estate, right? So you can anticipate their next contract renewal and start looking at what sort of a recommended estate would you propose to them going forward, and want to automate the whole process, give the agent access to the client's historical contractual information, as well as the sort of scope and specification of the entire estate, so that it can use its expertise to recommend the next leasing cycle. Would it have that capability to Obviously, you'll have to train it and give it the data, but in theory, would you be able to build an agent to handle that entire process right up until the end, drive all the estate selections in terms of what sort of laptops and stuff the client wants for the next 3 years, and to help them come to a final decision and say, this is what I want, generate a contract, send it out, handle all of that. And along the way, if it gets stuck, would it then be able to escalate to a human and say, listen, this person said he'll send it back and he hasn't, will you please handle it? I think, is that a realistic sort of a use case expectation?
Yeah. So I think what's important here is you need to decouple the kind of agent from the actions that the agent can do. So the agent being able to facilitate that entire process is very straightforward. But building the recommenders to be able to, and the kind of Gen AI stuff to generate the required kind of data for those kind of estate papers, that will be, I think, where the time will be spent, making sure that it's consistent and reliable and producing results that are useful for the customer. Once you have that, to set them up in a way that follows the customer and allows them to navigate through it cleanly, that is very straightforward and in place already.
Yeah, and perhaps make an agent that's inward facing so that it can advise the team and normally liaises with clients on this so that they can first review the recommended estate structure. If you
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Okay.
so there are different types of agents. You can have one of the agents we built for a POC for a customer was actually designed to be that clients use it to ask questions about customers. So they ask them like, what would be a good thing for this customer to do? And then they can present that to them over the phone or whatever. So that is definitely a way to do it as well.
Thanks, Ramsey.
That sounds very much like agent empowerment. You've got this sort of internal call center agents, so the people in your space get the opportunity to actually do their jobs a whole hell of a lot better. So this agent is not necessarily replacing those human jobs, but making the humans within that space a lot, supercharged ultimately.
Yeah, like a silly example, which we essentially touched on now, is if you just want to make a quick way to query your data without having to think up how to write the query, you can just go to an agent that's set up with the text to SQL and just ask it straight up, and you'll get all the information you want. So it helps you to better understand your data and query it very quickly without having to think about how you would design the SQL text to actually query it.
So that actually, and then we've also got, that's one way to look at your data when you get something back in that natural language response, which as humans, we're all very comfortable with it. But we've also then got integrations with Grafana and with Superset, so you can have that visualization in place as well. Sometimes, like Ramsey said, it's easier to just use that agent to query your data, get a quick response, rather than having to sift through whatever on these visual dashboards. But in a different scenario, the dashboards are there to give you just that deeper layer of analysis and understanding.
We are actually working on, we have a few kind of small demos of it, but we can generate graphs in your generative AI as well. You just say, I want to query this data and display it as a pie chart, display the results of pie chart. So that is bypasses the integration with Superset, make your graphs in the agent as you require. But obviously you want to have a quick view of everything, like your dashboard is still the way to go. But if you just want a quick answer of what does this look like, agent is quite useful.
Yeah, I think we talk a lot about having these agents in a customer service space, but it does seem like a lot of the power is with that internal space. You also then don't necessarily need to worry too much about it, learning how not to hallucinate, because you have that trust internally. You don't necessarily.
Yeah, there can still be the danger of if your employees start trusting the internal agent too much, and then it does start hallucinating, then you can end up getting people deleting things.
That always says like, this is experimental, guys. You just keep.
I think you can always just hard limit your agent when it starts doing dangerous things and allow it to delete things. Just be careful with how you implement. You can build an agent that can be very destructive if it starts hallucinating, but that is just handle with care is the name of the game.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, well, cool. I see it's a little past 5. Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for the questions, and Ramsey for providing all the answers and showing us behind the scenes of what it looks like, because this is everyone's talking about AI agents in the tech, and we want to know. For me, that's not a tech person at all. This is interesting because I want to know how it works and what's behind it. And this definitely helped me with my understanding of that. So thank you, and thanks for joining us.
Great day, everybody. Cheers.